Hello everybody, my name is Andrew Kirchhoff and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about who you should draft with your number one overall pick in this year's 2018 fantasy draft. So obviously, if you're watching this video, you were lucky enough to have the number one overall pick in your fantasy draft. Well, if you're not the number one overall pick, I'm still going to give you great information on the other running backs that are going in the first round. This year, more than any year, in my opinion, there are capable running backs left and right. There are probably 9 running backs that are going to go in your first rounds, whether they be PPR or half-point PPR, definitely standard leagues. But today, I'm going to go over these 5 options, as you can see on the screen in front of you. These are, in my opinion, the potential players that can be considered for being the number one overall pick in your draft. So I'm going to be giving arguments on why I think you should draft each one of these guys as your number one overall position. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, there's no wrong answer this year. All of these men in front of us, they're capable running backs that are going to produce in fantasy, some more than others, but at the end of the day, that's up to you to decide and for me to give you the information to make your decision as confident as possible. So let's get right into the first player that we're going to talk about, Todd Gurley. Hey everybody, how's it going? We're going to be talking about Todd Gurley first, right? Last year, he was the MVP of fantasy. He dominated leagues left and right, and he produced out of his mind. Last year in PPR scoring formats, he had 383.3 fantasy points. In half-point PPR scoring formats, he had 351.3 fantasy points. Right? Those kind of numbers you just don't see them. You don't see that. He outscored Le'Veon Bell by 40 points in PPR leagues and 50 points in half-point PPR leagues, right? And Le'Veon Bell was the second running back last year. So Todd Gurley last year was tenfold greater than all of the other running backs that he competed with, plain and simple, right? So what is the argument for Todd Gurley being the number one overall pick this year, right? Again, it's pretty simple. He's returning to a team that really hasn't lost too many offensive pieces. The quarterback's there. They've improved at wide receiver by bringing in Brandon Cooks. Yes, they lost Sammy Watkins, but I think Brandon Cooks can contribute more to this offense. The offensive line is still there, stable, and everyone's healthy. The defense is improved, which is always a help. The offensive coordinator and head coach, which is kind of the combination, Sean McVay, still there, and he's going to bring an offense to this league that cannot be matched. Last season, the Los Angeles Rams was the highest scoring offense in the NFL. They averaged 29.9 29.9 points per game in the NFL last season, right? So they were the highest scoring offense, and their running back was the highest scoring fantasy player. I mean, it correlated, right? So another argument we can make, right? As I said, they're bringing back all their players. Their offensive line, right? When it comes to running backs, you always have to make sure that your offensive line is healthy and stable. They're bringing back Andrew Whitworth. Yes, he's 35 years old, but he's a Pro Bowler. At the end of the day, yes, he slowed down a little bit last year, allowed 6 sacks, which was the most he had allowed since his rookie year in the NFL. But, it happens. He's still a leader of this offensive line, and he's going to make sure that Todd Gurley gets that push he needs. They're also bringing back Roger Saffold, who was, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman for the Rams last season. They're bringing back veteran John Sullivan. Jamon Brown won the right guard position last season. And Rob Havenstein, who's been there for the last 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, still holding up that right tackle spot. So their offensive line is still there. They are a top 5 offensive line in the NFL. Yes, they're a little bit older because their center is about 32 and Whitworth is about 35, 36. So yes, they're aged a little bit, but veterans on the offensive line it's not a problem in the NFL, right? An older running back can be a problem, but older offensive linemen having that experience, that leadership makes a huge difference. Other than the blocking up front, the Rams like to use tight ends for blocking. Tyler Higbee, who is the Rams starting tight end, Yes, he's not used a lot in the offense. That's why in my prior videos, I've ranked him low in fantasy number-wise for this 2018 season. They use him a lot in one tight end sets and sometimes even as a fullback to block. He pass blocks a lot, so they have a confidence in Tyler Higbee to show up and block for Todd Gurley and block for this offense. Another stat that I kind of want to go over, the Rams last season, which is a pretty insane stat, right? Averaged 1.9 yards before contact. So the offensive line for the Rams allowed Todd Gurley almost 2 yards before he was hit every single down when they ran the ball. Now that's pretty insane, right? That was a top 5 number last season. And imagine there was teams that were better, right? This offensive line, yes, they're older, but at the end of the day, they're giving Todd Gurley opportunities that he wasn't getting in 2016, right? Todd Gurley's average, his rushing, well, not his, yeah. Let me phrase this correctly, right? His rushing yard average was like 3.8 or 3.3 in 2016, and now it was I'm stumbling now. In 2017, it was close to 5 yards per carry. Let's just put it that way, okay? So he improved tenfold. Another argument that you can make, right? As I said before, they're the highest scoring offense, but is that going to stay? Can Todd Gurley's surroundings improve and continue to be the highest scoring offense? Will they get as many opportunities as they got in 2017? Excuse me. The way I see it, the NFC West, right, consists of the Rams, the Seahawks, the 49ers, and the Cardinals. These are all improved teams from last year. Everyone's improved. Maybe the Seahawks kind of lost it a little bit in these last couple seasons, but at the end of the day, it's a competitive division. So it might hurt Todd Gurley a little bit here and there, but at the end of the day, last year he proved that nothing was going to stop him. So here's the final pitch for Todd Gurley, okay? Why should you take Todd Gurley number 1? He's the safest pick to make, okay? He's going to work in PPR leagues. Yes, he's not going to catch as many balls as the other guys I'm going to talk about as this video progresses. But at the end of the day, Todd Gurley produced last year like no other. He is going to touch the ball 350 times this coming season, right? So he's going to have about 290 rushing attempts. He's going to catch the ball 50, 60 times this season. And with more touches and more opportunities, he has more opportunity to score fantasy-wise. And in my opinion, he is probably the safest pick for this 2018 season as the number 1 overall pick. That's why I've gone over him first, right? Plain and simple. He's shown in the past that he can produce, and the offense and the defense of the Rams, I mean, the Rams look really good this year. So why not Todd Gurley, right? So anyway, let's move on to the second person we're going to talk about today, Le'Veon Bell. Okay, Le'Veon Bell, the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? So here's the thing about Le'Veon Bell. I'm going to get the negatives out of the way real quick, okay? So for the last 2 years, Le'Veon Bell has done this thing consistently of where he doesn't show up to training camp. Why doesn't he show up to training camp? It's because the Steelers don't offer him a long-term contract, right? So in Le'Veon Bell's mind, he thinks, okay, well, if they're going to continue to franchise tag me, which is a 1-year deal for just about $15 million a year, which is pretty good, right? If they continue to franchise me, I'm not going to show up to training camp because if I get hurt, I'm done. If I get hurt in training camp, my season is over. They won't offer me that long-term contract, and there's too many negatives to going to training camp for Le'Veon Bell, right? As a person himself, if I was in issues, I'd probably do the same thing and abstain from going to training camp until they offered me that long-term deal. But for fantasy purposes, it doesn't really help Le'Veon Bell because Le'Veon Bell doesn't join the team until the first, if I'm not mistaken, last year, Le'Veon Bell didn't join the team until 1 week before the first game. So he only practiced a week and a half before playing the Cleveland Browns in week 1 in 2017. And he didn't produce well, right? Le'Veon Bell takes a couple weeks to get into being Le'Veon Bell status, right? So from looking at his stats from last year, he didn't really become Le'Veon Bell till about week 3. So that's kind of a scare too, right? Because at the end of the day, if Le'Veon Bell is, yes, you draft him number 1 overall, but you're not going to have him, full speed ahead, 20 touches a game for the first couple weeks. And, that's the risk you have to take. You might have a little bit of a production decline, and you won't score as many fantasy points within those first couple weeks. But at the end of the day, after those first couple weeks pass, Le'Veon Bell will be in full form. He'll be in football shape, and he'll start to dominate. And he'll get as many touches as anybody else, right? So just to put that in there, right? The first couple weeks, first 3 weeks, Le'Veon Bell is not going to be Le'Veon Bell. If he ends up doing well, then the defense they played against is garbage, okay? So here's the thing about Le'Veon Bell. Last season, comparatively to Todd Gurley, last season, Le'Veon Bell rushed the ball 42 times more and caught 21 more passes, right? So Le'Veon Bell, comparatively to Todd Gurley, yes, he didn't produce as much, but he had more opportunity, right? So that's a great thing, especially going into 2018, because I don't think Todd Gurley is going to rip off those 80-yard touchdowns, those 50-yard screen passes like he did last year, right? He might do a couple, but last year he was ripping them off every single game. So with Le'Veon Bell, you might be thinking, okay, well, Le'Veon Bell might be safer because you know that he's going to get his opportunities. Again, he had 42 more rushing attempts and 21 more receptions than Todd Gurley did last year. So at the end of the day, if you play in a PPR, Le'Veon Bell, is not a bad option because he's going to catch the ball more. 21 receptions, that's a pretty big deal in PPR leagues. And 42 more rushing attempts, it gives you an idea that at the end of the day, the Steelers are not afraid to give this man the ball. There was a game last season against the Ravens where Le'Veon Bell rushed the ball 30 times in one game. I mean, they're not afraid to hand this man off the ball up to 350 times in a year and let him touch the ball 400 times. So anyway, let's talk about the offensive line of Steelers, right? Some positives, right? They're bringing back their entire offensive line from last year. As of right now, there's nothing injury-wise that's holding them back. They have Alejandro Villanueva at left tackle, Ramon Foster at left guard, Marcus Pouncey at center, David DeCastro at right guard, and Marcus Gilbert at right tackle. This offensive line, just like the Rams, I think they're even better than the Rams in my opinion. When it comes to name value at least, I mean, Villanueva is a great left tackle. David DeCastro might be a future Hall of Famer. Marcus Pouncey's been doing it for a while. Ramon Foster's been doing it for a while. They've got a couple Pro Bowlers on this offensive line, and that's promising, right? Because that's what the Steelers want to do. They want to run the ball, and they want to feed Antonio Brown, and that's their MO. At the end of the day, especially when they play in that division against the Ravens and the Bengals defenses. We're not talking about the Cleveland Browns. I don't trust their defense. When you play against those kind of defenses, you need a good offensive line in order to be competitive, and they are. They win this league almost every year without a doubt. So other than the offensive line, like I talked about earlier, tight ends, Vance McDonald is one of the best blocking tight ends in football, plain and simple, right? Without a doubt in my mind, he's one of the best blocking tight ends in football. He's probably a top 5. In my opinion, right, they have Jesse James and they have Vance McDonald. They went and traded for Vance McDonald for his blocking. Yes, Jesse James doesn't really produce offensively as a deep threat tight end or even a check down tight end. He's not really great. But they went and got Vance McDonald, and I'm telling you, he can block. A couple years back for the 49ers, he had the best blocking rating of all their blockers on the 49ers. It was just an incredible stat. Coming over to the Steelers, he'll be more acclimated with the offense, and I'm telling you, he's a great blocker. So Le'Veon Bell has got himself a good offensive line and up front blocking for him for this 2018 season. So why do I think Le'Veon Bell should be drafted number 1 overall? At the end of the day, he's going to catch more balls than Todd Gurley, right? He is, let's just put it this way, right? Todd Gurley played out of his mind last year, right? But Le'Veon Bell produced like Le'Veon Bell does, right? Le'Veon Bell at this point in his career, he's consistent. He's going to get you 1,200 rushing yards, 600 receiving yards, and 10-plus touchdowns a year. He's consistent, right? He's not as volatile as Todd Gurley is, where one year he's down in the dumpsters, the next year he's the fantasy MVP. So if you're thinking, okay, I don't trust that Todd Gurley can two-peat and back-to-back be fantasy MVP, there's no safer pick than Le'Veon Bell. In my opinion, Le'Veon Bell might be the number one overall pick for me because, I had him last year, and he's a monster, plain and simple. But at the end of the day, for PPR, half-point PPR leagues, he's got immense value. He had over, if I'm not mistaken, let me check real quick. He had 100 targets last year, right? He caught 81 balls last year, but at the end of the day, he had 100 targets. That's receiver-like numbers, right? If you're getting 100 targets, you're the number 2 wide receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you're not just drafting a running back. You're drafting a running back who's capable of catching the ball out of the backfield enough times in a year that in PPR, he's making a huge difference. Fantasy points for Le'Veon Bell last year. In full-point PPR, he scored 341.6 points, and in half-point PPR, he was at 299.1. At the end of the day, he was the number 2 running back in both of those leagues behind Todd Gurley. If you don't trust that Todd Gurley can repeat and be that stud that he was last year, right? Because he's going to regress. There's no way in hell, and I'll eat my words, there's no way in hell that he comes back out and does that exact same thing. That's a impossible task to get to, especially as a running back in the NFL. So the way I see it, if you are like me and you don't think that Todd Gurley can come out and do that again, then Le'Veon Bell is your man. He should be your number 1 overall pick, plain and simple. So let's move on to the next player we're going to talk about, Ezekiel Elliott. Okay. So Zeke last year, right? He had that little suspension thing looming around him the entire year. It was a plague on the team, the Dallas Cowboys. And at the end of the day, it was tough because he played for the first 10 games of the season and still ended up as the 10th ranked running back in fantasy. So hopefully you heard that. I'll repeat it, okay? Because at the end of the day, it's an incredible feat for him, okay? Having only played 10 games, 10 of the 16 games last season, okay? He was the 10th ranked running back in half-point PPR fantasy, okay? Half-point PPR fantasy. 10th ranked running back. He was an RB1 only playing 10 games. That's incredible. He was a top 12 running back. He was a top 10 running back, having only played 10 games last season, right? So that kind of shows you what Zeke's all about, right? So when Zeke played an entire year, right, which was 2016, Zeke, is a monster. In 2016, right, in full-point PPR leagues, he had 325 points. In half-point PPR leagues, he had almost 310. Last year, only playing 10 games, Zeke didn't really produce much. He had 203 points in full-point PPR and 190 points in half-point PPR. But again, in 10 games, he was still the 10th ranked running back in half-point PPR leagues. So, where do I see Zeke this year? Why should you draft him number 1 overall? At the end of the day, the way I see it, the Dallas Cowboys are kind of a mess, right? They don't have Dez Bryant. They released Dez Bryant. Jason Witten retired. And their receiving core is pretty right? They've got Allen Hurns, Terrence Williams, Cole Beasley, Tavon Austin, Michael Gallup, okay? There's 5 receivers that have never been number 1 receivers wherever they've been, okay? They also have 2 tight ends that are really just mediocre. They have Blake Jarwin and Geoff, I don't even remember his last name. You see, he's so forgettable. But at the end of the day, the Cowboys love to run the ball. They love to give the ball to Zeke, and they want to control the clock, plain and simple. They want to make sure their defense is not on the field, and they want to make sure that they have long offensive drives that will make the other team's defense as tired as possible. So when the fourth quarter comes by, Zeke is ripping by people. So let's talk about, the Dallas Cowboy offensive line, right? This offensive line, in my opinion, might be the best of all of them, right? At the end of the day, they've got Pro Bowlers left, right, and center, right? Left, especially at the tackle position, Tyron Smith, the best offensive tackle in the NFL since Joe Thomas retired. I mean, there it is. You have the best left tackle in the NFL. At left guard, they have Connor Williams. Last year, Jonathan Cooper had this position, but since then, they've cut Jonathan Cooper. Connor Williams will probably win the spot this offseason and be the left guard. At center, another Pro Bowler, Travis Frederick, the man with the giant beard, just like me. Right guard, they have Zach Martin, who they just signed to a 5-year, $100 million contract, another Pro Bowler. And they've got Lyle Collins at right tackle, right? Last year, it was his first year playing right tackle. Prior to that, he was just a left guard exclusively. He had a little bit of struggles last year, but because of that, he's gained experience. He's coming back for his second year at right tackle. And this offensive line is a well-oiled machine. I don't know much about their tight ends. Jason Witten used to be a blocking machine. We don't got Jason Witten anymore. So Zeke, he's got to fend for himself. This offensive line's got to, get after it. So here's the thing. This is maybe why you should draft Ezekiel Elliott #1 overall. Okay? Yes, in PPR and half-point PPR leagues, he's not going to be as valuable. Just sheerly off of his receptions, right? He can't compete with guys like Le'Veon Bell, who's catching the ball 81 times a year. Zeke this year is probably going to catch the ball 40 times, right? So if you play in a full-point PPR, there's 40 points gone that Zeke just can't get because he's not a receiving back. He's not asked to catch the ball out of the backfield because that's just not how their scheme runs. So the way I see it, PPR leagues, there's a little bit of downside to drafting Zeke #1 overall. But in half-point PPR leagues where it's not that much of a difference, Zeke is a running back that's going to run for 1,400 yards. He's going to run for 14 to 15 rushing touchdowns. He's going to have, 35 receptions for, 400 yards. He's going to produce because he is the only offensive piece on this Dallas Cowboys that has an actual shot at just ripping off because the rest of them, they've never been asked to produce like the way they're going to be asked this year. Zeke's a monster. The offensive line's there. When you've got Dak under center, he's so much better with Zeke in the backfield. I mean, the difference between Dak with and without Ezekiel Elliott it's just ridiculous. Dak looks like a pedestrian out there without Zeke in the backfield. So this year, Zeke's back. He's not going to get suspended, hopefully. And he's going to touch the ball 400 times this year. They're going to hand this man the ball up to 320 times. He's going to rush the ball 320 times. He's going to catch the ball 40 some odd times. So that's about 360. I project it to be more. I'm thinking he's going to touch the ball upwards of 400 times. I mean, they're going to hand him the ball every play if they have to. And at the end of the day, if you're a Cowboys fan and you like what I'm selling, maybe Zeke should be your #1 overall pick. Anyway, let's move on to the fourth running back we're going to talk about today. David Johnson. Okay. Anyway, excuse me. Hello. Anyway, so let's talk about David Johnson real quick. Last year, in the first game of the season, David Johnson. Well, okay. Before we get there, last season, David Johnson was the consensus #1 overall pick. Right? Le'Veon Bell was #2, but David Johnson was #1. And in many leagues, David Johnson was drafted #1 overall. Right? Unfortunately, David Johnson broke his wrist within the first quarter of the first game last season. Right? Now, for fantasy owners, that's probably the worst news that you could possibly hear. Especially last year, a lot of people were just crushed because your #1 overall pick just down the garbage chute and it's over. He never came back last season. But the thing is, okay, so let's put it this way. Let me get my thoughts all in order. David Johnson broke his wrist, right? It's not like he tore his ACL. It's not like he had a terrible hip injury like Dennis Pitta had a couple years back. It's a simple broken wrist. The wrist will heal. All will be fine. It's not an Achilles injury. It's not a leg injury, right? Because for running backs, if it was a leg injury, we have problems. That's an issue. But it was only a wrist injury. So he's coming back still as David Johnson. It's not like his legs aren't working, right? And he's coming back to a better Cardinals team, in my opinion, right? Yes, they don't have Carson Palmer, but at the end of the day, Josh Rosen and Sam Bradford will fill that position. Larry Fitzgerald is still there. The offensive line is much improved. I mean, it's incredible how much they've improved this offensive line in this offseason. So, let's go right into the offensive line, and then I'll read you some stats, okay? So for the longest time, Jason Valdir was left tackle for the Cardinals. He's no longer with the organization. He just injuries left and right. They couldn't rely upon him to be healthy on a weekly basis. So at left tackle, it's going to be DJ Humphries this year. At left guard, they're going to have Mike Iupati, who on a consistent yearly basis is a Pro Bowl guard. At center, they got A.Q. Shipley, who's also another consistent offensive lineman. Justin Pugh from the Giants last year. Justin Pugh has worked around. He's played left guard, center, right guard, and right tackle, all in a matter of one season before. And at right tackle, they have Andre Smith from the Cincinnati Bengals. So this offensive line, comparatively to last year, is much improved, right? David Johnson is inheriting, he took 1 year off. He is inheriting an offensive line that's going to maul people in this division. So, I 100% see the Cardinals being extremely competitive this year comparatively to last. Last year was they just let the wheels come off and nobody tried to save them. Okay, so here's the thing. Last year, there's no fantasy stats to base anything off, right? So you'd have to base it off what he produced in 2016. But the problem is, right, here's the big problem. David Johnson in 2016 perhaps had like a top 5 fantasy year in all of fantasy ever, okay? He produced in full point PPR leagues 408 points, okay? 408 points. That means he had an even better season than Todd Gurley did last year, right? So David Johnson in 2016 was a monster, okay? He had 80 receptions. He had 800 yards receiving. He had 20 touchdowns in 2016. He was an absolute, it's just hard to understand. But David Johnson was a monster in 2016. That's why he was the number 1 overall pick. That's why everyone that had the number 1 overall pick was like, boom, it's David Johnson without a doubt in my mind. And you know what happened? It was an injury. It was nothing anybody could have expected. It's just random BS luck that just, you got hit with. And it's unfortunate, but you can't do anything about that because it's fantasy football at the end of the day. And you can't expect, something like that to happen. And you hope it doesn't, but it did. So where do I see David Johnson this coming season, right? Again, as I said, I think they have an improved offense. Their receiving corps is still there because Larry Fitzgerald's there. They just drafted Christian Kirk to come in. They still have J.J. Nelson. Their tight ends. Okay, I forgot to talk about tight ends. Jermaine Gresham and Ricky Seals-Jones. Ricky Seals-Jones is the receiving tight end of this team, right? He used to be a wide receiver, and he's a receiving tight end, okay? Jermaine Gresham, who's been with the Cardinals the last couple years, is, if not the top 3 blocking tight end in the NFL. He is just primarily used for blocking at the end of the day, right? He has a job because he knows how to block. I mean, that's plain and simple. The Cincinnati Bengals had him for the longest time. He was their blocking tight end. He came over to the Cardinals a couple years back, and he's a great blocking tight end. So with Jermaine Gresham in this offensive line, David Johnson's looking great. Yes, the quarterback situation's a little bit, not even a little bit. It's definitely sketchy, right? You have Sam Bradford, who can't stay healthy, and you have Josh Rosen, who can't keep his mouth shut, right? You got 2 guys that have issues, right? But they can both play football at the end of the day, right? They're both talented players, right? Josh Rosen, 10th overall pick this past season, and Sam Bradford was a first-round pick God knows how long ago, but he doesn't have 2 legs anymore. He just pretty much sits in the pocket and throws the ball. So the way I see it, my argument for David Johnson to be your number 1 overall pick in 2018, he's going to catch maybe more balls than any of these running backs that I'm going to talk about today, because that's how their offense revolves, right? It revolves around the idea that the running back should touch the ball as many times as he can because check downs left and right will always help your quarterback, especially if they put Josh Rosen in, a younger quarterback. A check down to David Johnson might be his favorite, option. He's going to, with this offensive line, dominate up front. The more I talk about this, I'm starting to like David Johnson even more, right? Yes, he's coming off of an injury, but it's not a leg injury. He's still going to be running full speed ahead and just dominating the league. Prior to his injury, he was considered the best running back in football. I don't see why he can't be again this year. In fantasy purposes wise, yes, we can't expect him to be what he was in 2016 because that was just an insane year. But at the end of the day, for PPR and half-point PPR, David Johnson is a stud. And he should definitely be considered for your number 1 overall selection. Okay, so let's move on to the next guy we're going to talk about, Alvin Kamara. Okay, Alvin Kamara last year, the offensive rookie of the year, right? Rookie. He's a rookie, and he's being talked about as potentially the first overall pick of a draft. Okay, so this is the way I see it, right? Alvin Kamara, comparatively to the rest of the guys, has a little bit of a disadvantage, right? He's more or less the second string running back of his team, right? Mark Ingram is the starting running back of the New Orleans Saints. So Alvin Kamara, okay, let's put this in perspective. Alvin Kamara is the second string running back of his team, yet in full point PPR, he put up 320 points, and in half point PPR, he put up 280 points. So just put that into perspective. Alvin Kamara as a second string running back is almost as good as Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell does not share that backfield, not even a little bit. Okay? So let me just read some stats so you kind of get an idea. So last season, Alvin Kamara only played 13 games. Okay? Now you might be thinking, Andrew, I looked at it the other day and it says he played 16 games. So what's going on here? Well, let me tell you. In week 1 and 2, the running backs for the New Orleans Saints were Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara, but Adrian Peterson was still with the organization, right? So any attempts that Alvin Kamara was to get, Adrian Peterson was eating it up. So for the first 2 weeks of the 2017 season, Alvin Kamara really wasn't utilized. He was used a couple times as a receiving back, but he was never really handed off the ball. He had a couple attempts a game, maybe 2 to 3 attempts. So and then as soon as Adrian Peterson left, boom, Alvin Kamara took over, right? He solidified his position within the offense, okay? And then you're thinking, okay, well, that's only 2 games, Andrew. You said he only played 13. Well, in week 13 against the Atlanta Falcons, if I'm not mistaken, it was a Thursday night game because I was looking at my phone. I even remember I was like, no, Alvin. Anyway, he had a concussion in the first quarter, and he didn't play for the rest of that game. So in my opinion, he only played 13 games. So he missed 3 games. And still, with 13 games played, he was the number 3 running back in fantasy last year. With only 13 games played. Okay? Here's another crazy stat. Alvin Kamara only had 120 rushing attempts. Only had 120 rushing attempts last year. Let's put this into perspective, okay? Le'Veon Bell had 320 rushing attempts last season. So that means Le'Veon Bell had 200 more rushing attempts than Alvin Kamara did last year. What? He had 200 more rushing attempts than Alvin Kamara. And Alvin Kamara was 20 points behind in PPR and half-point PPR leagues scoring. Only 20 points and 200 rushing attempt difference. What? Hello? Help me. He's a monster, okay? Alvin Kamara is a monster. This is what I'm trying to sell, okay? Other than that, right, he has Mark Ingram in the backfield still, right? Mark Ingram's still there. But instead, for the first 4 games of the season, Mark Ingram is suspended, right? He was busted for performance-enhancing drugs, and for the NFL just gave him a suspension for the first 4 games of the season. Understandable. You break the rules, you got to pay, right? But at the end of the day, there's a lot of fantasy value, available for Alvin Kamara within those first 4 weeks, okay? So let me read this stat. If I am not mistaken, I've got it. on my screen ahead of me. Okay, so listen to this. Oh my God, this is actually insane. Oh man. Okay, so last year, Mark Ingram, who was the starting running back of the New Orleans Saints, right? And Alvin Kamara was the second string running back. Mark Ingram was the sixth, right? Number six, okay? Ranked running back in fantasy last year. Okay, so to put that in perspective, this backfield was producing like no other. This backfield, of Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara was unstoppable. Now, why were they unstoppable? Well, they've got Drew Brees, and they've got a hell of an offensive line, right? So let's go over this offensive line. Left tackle, Teron Armstead, stud, right? The left guard, Andrus Pete, I don't know. He's decent, right? But he's obviously a stud, right? Because he's doing something. Max Unger, Pro Bowl center, still there with the Saints, producing, okay? Larry Warford, the right guard, monster stud, without a doubt. And the right tackle, who's Ryan Ramczyk. The right tackle for the Saints for the longest time was Zach Strief. But Zach Strief had an injury last year. They drafted Ryan Ramczyk at the end of the first round in 2017. He popped right in, played all 16 games, done. This offensive line is set. Again, this is another really good offensive line. That's the correlation, right? If you've got a great offensive line, your running back is going to just pop off, right? And for fantasy purposes, that's what you want, plain and simple. Other than their offensive line, they've got great blocking from tight ends. Now, ever since they lost Jimmy Graham a couple years back, they haven't really utilized the tight end position like they did when they had Jimmy Graham. They brought in Ben Watson for a couple years. They had Colby Fleener last year. And especially last season, right? Colby Fleener had an injury. He was out for the rest of the season because of this injury. And they utilized their tight ends for primarily only blocking, okay? They have Josh Hill and Michael Humanamanui, right? You hear that last name, Humanamanui, as their two blocking tight ends who are just 100% only blocking tight ends. So they didn't really even have a receiving tight end on the roster last season that was healthy. This year, they brought back Ben Watson, who is a pretty good tight end. He came back from the Ravens. Last time he was on the Saints, he was a captain of this team, right? So they're bringing in another tight end who has capabilities in blocking. But again, they still have Josh Hill and Humanamanui on this roster, so they can block, okay? So again, my arguments for this, right? Alvin Kamara, he produced out of his mind last year. Can he do it again? I say why not, right? Especially with Mark Ingram not being there for the first 4 games of the season. Maybe Alvin Kamara takes over and wins the starting spot. And then Mark Ingram's got to play second fiddle, right? But at the end of the day, I don't see that really happening because Kamara is more of a change of pace back while Ingram is going to plunge into the offensive line for those hard downs. Let's see this. Yeah, 200 rushing attempt difference between him and Le'Veon Bell. That's insane. It's actually insane. So the way I see it, Alvin Kamara, he's going to catch 80 some odd balls next year without a doubt, right? In full point PPR and in half point PPR, that sets you up perfectly. That's how it is, right? If you're going to catch the ball 80 some odd times like David Johnson is, like Le'Veon Bell is, that gives you a huge difference. You don't have to produce as much on the floor, which Alvin Kamara really doesn't. At the end of the day, Alvin Kamara last year had 13 touchdowns again. That's an incredible number too. The argument for number 1 overall pick for Alvin Kamara, yes, he's young. He's coming off of his rookie year. But if he can get, in those first 4 games, 25 touches a game, and he can produce with 25 touches a game, because on a weekly basis in 2017, he would run the ball maybe 8 to 10 times a game, and he would catch the ball, give or take, 6 times a game, right? That's not even, when I say 8 to 10 times a game, that wasn't on average, right? It was 8 to 10 times a game on a good day. Sometimes he'd run the ball for 4 times a game. That's not great. But at the end of the day, he produced with the opportunities he was given. So if you like that situation, then why not, right? Alvin Kamara as your number 1 overall pick. Okay, so now that I've talked about all of these 5 running backs, right? Talked about Todd Gurley. I've talked about Le'Veon Bell, Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, and now Alvin Kamara, right? I've kind of laid an idea in your brain, right? To have it start to, marinate. You're thinking, well, maybe I want this, maybe I want that. At the end of the day, there's no mistake until that first, couple weeks has gone by and you're like, uh-oh, here we go. You won't know that your number 1 overall pick isn't going to be the top running back until week 16 of the 2018 season. You won't know, right? Because at the end of the day, you might come out in week 1 like Le'Veon Bell is, and he just, gives you a goose egg. Okay, but the rest of the weeks he's going to produce. So you won't know if you made a mistake or not until way into the future. So I'm just going to give you my ideas, my rankings of these guys on who I would consider drafting number 1 overall. And here it is. Yes, you don't see my beautiful face anymore, but, you can live, okay? You can just rewind the video or something. I don't know. Well, go watch another video. Okay, anyway, so in PPR scoring, in my opinion, without a doubt, it's got to be Le'Veon Bell, number 1 overall pick, right? I have Todd Gurley at my number 2 ranked in this kind of scenario, only because I think Todd Gurley, it's tough because I know David Johnson's going to catch more balls than him, but at the end of the day, I trust Todd Gurley. I have David Johnson at 3. I've got Alvin Kamara at 4, and I got Ezekiel Elliott at 5, right? For Zeke, it's tougher. In full PPR leagues, Zeke is good. Like, let's say, for example, if this was a full PPR draft, this is probably how it's going to go, okay? You're going to see number 1 overall, it's going to be Le'Veon Bell. Number 2 will probably be Gurley. 3 will be David Johnson. And then 4, Kamara. And then if you're at the 5 spot in a draft, you got Zeke. And that's not bad. I'm telling you, it's not bad. These are all workhorse running backs, okay? In half-point PPR leagues, okay? Because the reception is not as valued, I've moved Todd Gurley back at the number 1 spot. I've moved down Le'Veon Bell to the number 2. David Johnson's a consistent 3. I moved up Ezekiel Elliott, because obviously if the receptions aren't as valuable, then it gives him more opportunity to be you know what? It's not that he gets more valuable. It's that Alvin Kamara's value will go down if it's not a full-point PPR league. So at the end of the day, the way I see it, these are 5 great options. There is no wrong answer at this point, right? When you draft these players, at the end of the day, you should be happy, okay? No matter who you draft number 1 overall. Yes, I think that Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley are the number 1 and 2, and they can be, interchanged this coming season. But if you want to take, David Johnson at number 1, that is not that's not a wrong answer. Because David Johnson has proved in the past, and the arguments I gave about his offensive line and his offense, and him not, coming off of a knee injury of some sort, he can potentially be the number 1 running back in 2018. We don't know. This is all projections at this point. But if you want him, grab him number 1 overall. If you want Zeke number 1 because you think they're actually going to give him 400 touches this year, do it. If you want Alvin Kamara because you're like, well, Alvin Kamara is the most exciting and explosive player out of all these, and I feel like he's going to pop off this year, go for it. At the end of the day, the way I see it, there's no wrong answer. Okay? This list I've put up could even change in the coming weeks. You never know. But the way I see it, this is the formation of how I would draft it. And it's up to you now, as your drafts come up, to decide who you want as your number 1 overall pick. I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank all my latest subscribers, people who liked my videos, shared my videos. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to keep try to pump out content as consistently as possible. And make sure it's quality content, not just make some bullshit video for 7 minutes. This was a 45-minute video already. Wow. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up real quick. Thank you for watching. And we'll probably come out. I will probably put out a video within the next couple days. And I just want to thank you all again. And have a good one. Later.